welcome to the show this week. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, my guest this week is Professor Frank Furedi. He has been on the channel a number of times before. Welcome, Frank. And usually it's because he's got a new book out, because he's authored about 26 books. He's now director of the MCC in Brussels, which we will talk about a little. But in the meantime, his new book, The War Against the Past. I think this is something that will be very, very near to your hearts because we talk about it so much on the channel. Why the West must fight for its history. It's an obvious question, Frank, but I mean, why must we fight for our history?
I think the answer is very simple. If we do not understand where we've come from, if we're confused about our origins and our relationship to our ancestors, then it's very difficult to know where to head. Because in many respects, our future depends on the clarity that we have about the moral, intellectual foundation of our world. And the thing that I really worry about is that there seems to be a systematic attempt to detach us from our past. And especially with young kids, if they're not actually told where we come from. In fact, what they're told is that wherever we've come from is on balance a bad thing, and we need to be better, and we need to forget about what's gone on beforehand and start anew.
It seems to me that, obviously your book is very wide-ranging, but it seems to me that this is from around about 2020, this seemed to get turbocharged in the wake of George Floyd and all of that. Suddenly there was all the decolonization going on in our institutions. But it goes back much further than that, doesn't it?
Yes, it's in a very insidious, silent way. It's been going around and about ever since the late 1970s, which is a very long time. And when I look back upon the school curriculum, I look back upon what history was in schools, you realize that about 4 generations of young people have been indoctrinated to hate their past, particularly to hate the British past, and also to dislike everything that's Western. That's been going around for a very, very long time. And I think what happened was that suddenly this process that was fairly imperceptible to many people suddenly crystallized into something much more obvious and much more threatening, particularly in the post-Black Lives Matter era. And suddenly anything that moved or anything that meant something in our past became a target of decolonization, which basically simply means, decolonization simply means to pathologize something that has occurred beforehand, to render it toxic, to regard it as a source of contamination that we need to guard against. And everybody is implicated in this. I cannot think of a single historical figure that you and I might revere or you and I might like, from Aristotle to Shakespeare to Immanuel Kant. Every single individual is reinterpreted in the worst possible light, and every single individual is cast into the role of a white supremacist.
Yes, and also there is this ridiculous thing of imposing our own kind of, you know, I hate the word values actually, but imposing our own ideas and values on the past. I mean, to give you an example, 2 examples actually. This week, or just this past week, the Albert Memorial in Kensington Gardens has suddenly come under attack as being, you know, depicting people in a colonial context, which of course it would have done when it went up. But it's actually being attacked by the people who are there to look after it, the royal parks themselves. And this is the worrying thing. It's coming from the inside, it seems to me.
Yes, I think that what I try to point out in the book is that none of this could have happened, first of all, without the complicity of our cultural elites, who themselves just simply opened the door and allowed every single insidious influence to gain traction. And since that time, it's the people who are in charge of preserving our heritage. They're the people that are in charge of, you know, of preserving museum collections, for example, who have basically inculcated this new narrative, whereby everything that's gone on beforehand must have some kind of a negative sort of driver to it. So you cannot go to a museum in Britain or Western Europe, for that matter, before you see these warning signs that basically say this particular exhibition is bad for your health. I mean, it gets to the point where even sort of figurines and statues from ancient Greece are criticized, explicitly criticized, and we're told that it's interesting that these statues are white rather than any other color, because presumably these white statues were designed to be white in order to celebrate white supremacy and white privilege, as if somehow these ideals existed in ancient Greece or in ancient Rome.
Yes, well, my sister actually recently went just for a stay in Stratford-on-Avon, and they went to one of the number of historical places. I think it might have been Anne Hathaway's cottage, I don't know what. And before they walked in, there was a sign saying, during this period, you know, there was huge gender inequality. So you're being set up. You're talking about the 16th century. You know, set up, aren't you, to see it in a certain context?
Yes. So in the book, what I try to explain, and this is something that actually surprised me, is that unlike before, when people rewrite history, that's a normal thing, and it's even normal to revise history, reinterpret it. Something very different is occurring now in the very systematic way, in which almost seek to colonize the past with our ideals. So the key thing that has never happened before, to the extent that exists now, is that the temporal distinction between the present and the past has become eroded. So what we have is the ever-present, where the present is, in a sense, projected backwards. And in so doing, what we essentially are saying is that we are better people. We don't just simply know more, but we are better people than someone like Adam Smith or Immanuel Kant or any figure that lived before us. And we have the privilege and the authority, the moral authority, to correct their bad views, to almost like teach them to be better people. It's almost as if our job is to teach these great figures that existed beforehand a lesson. So just to give you an example, it's not common, for example, for some people to rewrite a Shakespearean play, for example, Othello, and make it more, and give it a more racist language, on the grounds that the more racist the vocabulary in Othello, the more we bring out what Shakespeare really meant. The assumption being that somehow Shakespeare was diplomatic in his use of a racial vocabulary. Well, aside from the fact that Shakespeare had nothing to do with race to begin with, what they are really saying is that we know better than Shakespeare did about what he wanted to say. So we, hundreds of years later, are going to put Shakespeare right. We're going to, in a sense, like a school teacher to a child, correct his little mistakes because Shakespeare just wasn't smart enough to express his real views.
Yes, it does. You're quite right there, because it does feel that one's being made to feel immature. It's infantilizing, but also it's extremely Philistine, isn't it?
Oh, it's so totally Philistine, because it means you cannot really appreciate an art object or any creatively designed material sort of object without politicizing it. So when you're looking at a vase, when you're looking at a painting, when you're reading a book, what you are looking for are the mistakes of those individuals. Your real object in reviewing these artifacts is to find fault with them, and to unearth its real meaning, its political meaning, but you're doing it out of the context within which those things were produced. And you're not really looking at its beauty, you're not looking at it from an aesthetic point of view. What you really are saying is something that needs to be politicized, needs to be unwrapped as a political object and then rendered harmless in the way you would do now.
Yes, yes. The thing is about this is that I don't think anyone doubts this is happening. right? And it appears to be on a daily basis there's something, whether it's a tabloid sort of story or whether it's something that we learn about one of our institutions, or particularly the academic world, which is of course your world. But why? You see, when I look at this, I think of one thing, and that is, this is what happens during a revolution. Do you think there's a revolution going on?
Well, I think that there's a quiet attempt, a systematic attempt, but at the same time, half-conscious attempt to basically break away from the past and to, in a sense, to undermine and discredit the values and the principles and the norms that were associated with Western civilization. So anything that you and I might think is normal and anything that we think is a valuable ideal to live by is something that they want to, in a sense, destroy, undermine, and discredit. And the people that are doing this are kind of almost like they kind of indoctrinated to thinking that by doing this we kind of free ourselves to create a new world, a world that is totally anew. I use the expression year zero ideology because what they're trying to do is to say now our world is year zero. Everything that happens from now onward is potentially good and valuable, but everything that has gone on beforehand is by definition a problem and needs to be seen in that particular kind of a way. And I think that attempt to usurp and to destroy and in a sense to dispossess society of its heritage is an explicit kind of ideological crusade which is led by people who are themselves not really sure where they're going. All they know is that they're kind of reacting against it, they want to destroy it, without necessarily knowing what the alternative is.
Yes, because it's only really happening in the West, isn't it? I mean, you know, the Middle Eastern world, you know, the Asian world, you know, it is not prevalent there. It is in our kind of societies, is it not?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because if you talk to Chinese people and you kind of talk to Chinese intellectuals, you'll find that in China there's a far greater readership for the artifacts of Western civilization, for the big books. You know, all the books that are really central to that. They're very interested in Greece, they're very interested in Rome. A big discussion is going on about Gibbon and the decline or fall of Roman civilization. So all these things are much more their academic heritage than it is ours, because in the West these things are regarded as relatively unimportant. So in other societies, this hasn't happened yet. But I think that it will happen because this particular development exists in a wider context, which is the culture war that's being fought out, and particularly fought out in the United States. It particularly originates in California, where all these bad ideas usually begin, and then gradually through soft power, they kind of spread all over the world. And I think the culture wars are something that people often tell me, oh, it's almost over, people are reacting against it. You know, don't worry about it, Frank, it's going to be exhausted soon. They've been saying this for like 30 years. And I think it's getting stronger and stronger all the time for a very simple reason that it's being sustained by what's happening in schools. People focus on academia, but the real problem is the school system, where young children are basically educated into hating their own ancestors, their own background, their own history. So as long as young kids grow up, you know, sort of in accordance with these values, the culture war is always going to have new recruits who are going to fight their battles. But I do think that this is something that is going to spread eventually to other parts of the world that are modernized, industrialized, for a very simple reason that American self-power, which is saturated with this kind of ideals, is remarkably influential, no matter how weakening the American economy is. Its soft power still has got a hegemonic status.
Well, just through Netflix or whatever,
Netflix, yes.
you know. I mean, I what I can gather, it's sort of happening in Central and Eastern Europe, you know, which is, tends to be looked upon, you know, by people, you know, of my politics as a kind of, you know, our Israel, if you like, in the sense that, but even there, you know, it's sort of seeping in. I just wonder, I mean, you were once a Marxist, weren't you, or Trotskyist, would you say? Do you not sort of, do you have any truck with the idea that this is part of a kind of Gramscian hollowing out of the culture?
Not really. I think people who've never read Gramsci actually see a link where there isn't. I mean, Gramsci, as it happened, is interesting because when he was in prison, his son wrote him a letter, this under Mussolini, saying, "Dad, I don't want to learn Greek, ancient Greek. I'm not interested in Latin. I want to do these modern technical subjects that are being promoted by the fascist government."
Right.
And Gramsci wrote back to him saying, "Look, you're crazy. You know, unless you are educated in the ancient Greeks, unless you speak Latin and can read Latin and understand the heritage of Europe's ancient civilization, you're not going to be an educated person." That was Gramsci, you know, and I think that, you know, Gramsci, and as it happens, most Marxists, whatever their sins, understood that they had to, in some shape or form, understand and build on the cultural accomplishments of the West. They might have interpreted it differently than you and I, but for them the past was really quite important, and they would very often point to certain people in the past as their heroes, like Spartacus.
Yeah.
You know, if you were a Leninist in Russia, you would say, "Oh, look at the Spartacist rebellion! Isn't that heroic? Isn't that good?" Whereas these people that are on today, you know, they would probably, you know, sort of criticize Spartacus for his male toxic masculinity.
Yes, yes.
It's a very different approach, and people often wrongly imagine that there's a connection. If there was a connection, that'd be easier to deal with. What's difficult to deal with is that the origins and the subsequent development of the culture wars is so confusing because so much is done semi-consciously, unsystematically. So much of it is a compromise between a cultural elite that emerged in the 1970s and new generations of people that it hasn't got that kind of systematic character yet, which it will have fairly soon. But you know, we're always struggling to know what to call them. I don't know about you, but I'm not very happy with the word woke.
No.
And I'm not very happy with the word political correct. I'm always, you know, saying, well, what can I call these people who themselves refuse to give themselves a label?
Yes. Well, this is it causes problems when one tries to look at the origin of it too. I mean, we've recently had Eric Kaufman on talking generally about what you might call woke.
Yeah.
Like you, I think it's too trivializing actually for what's happening. He sees it as absolutely coming from liberalism, not Marxism, but liberalism, a kind of, you know, a distortion of liberalism, or the natural end result, the inevitable end result of liberalism.
I think it's got a small point. I don't necessarily agree with Eric. I think if there's one movement that is linked to this indirectly, it's American progressivism, which had a liberal dimension. What progressivism was an attempt to normalize social engineering. For them, social engineering, using various techniques and technologies to improve the world, particularly promoted by someone like John Dewey, was really quite important. And I think there's a very clear link between this we know better than you do kind of approach towards changing the way that people think, and that arrogant moral authority that we are aware these people are not, is something that has continued and gained force, gained traction today. And I always tell people that the way that I know who's on the other side is whenever sooner or later they use the expression, "We're here to raise awareness." Mm-hmm. And you know that whenever they're here to raise awareness, you know, you're in trouble, I'm in trouble, because in their eyes, that's something I haven't got.
Yeah. Or problematic is another word.
Problematic,
problematic is another word. Very much. Very problematic word. Okay, Can I ask, on a personal level, you in your own life, do you find this demoralizes you? You said I've been watching this for 30 years. I find that myself, and for that matter, a lot of people I think watching and people I talk to feel, and they can't quite articulate it, but they feel utterly demoralized and without, and a growing sense of a lack of context. Do you feel that? I mean, do you feel that in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, on some days, I call those days my I hate Frank days. I do feel, you know, what's the point? And sometimes in the morning, I have breakfast and my wife and I look at each other and we say, either they're crazy or we're crazy, especially when you listen to the Today program. So there are those days, but at the same time, I also feel that this is a very consequential existential battle that we need to fight. And in my job, especially now in Brussels, where I kind of work with this think tank, I feel that there's some positive developments occurring.
Yes.
So for example, it's interesting that a lot of young people are turning away from that typical leftish, sort of cultish, sort of approach towards identity politics. And you find, for example, in Holland, where the probably the largest section of under 24-year-olds who voted for Geert Wilders. You find that in France. I went to Paris to give a talk where there was some people from it was a Rassemblement National meeting, and they often are told these are old people, old conservative, old populist, but the audience was very, very young. A lot of young men, young women were there. So there is something that there's a body of opinion that recognizes that what's happening is that they're being dispossessed of their identity, they're being dispossessed of their past and their history. And that's something really valuable because it tells me that it's not a hopeless cause to kind of react to this.
Yeah, so my experience is exactly the same. There are some exceptional young people actually around. It must have great strength of mind actually, given how they've grown up. But what I have noticed is how radical many of them are. They're almost taking on the rules of identity politics and saying, well, this is what I am. I am, say, white, I'm British, and, no more. You're not going to keep on. If it's had the overall effect of radicalizing the very people that it probably didn't want to.
It has, and I do worry about that because we don't want our people to become mirror image of the other side. There's a danger that whenever they say plus, we say negative or vice versa. And we become caricatures of ourselves. So we've got to be very careful because we need to be better than they are. We need to be more subtle, more nuanced, more balanced in the way that we argue. We need to always be open to discussion and debate. And radicalism is useful, but radicalism is useful because it allows you to be brave in enunciating and saying things that people are scared to say. So for example, a lot of people in Britain and elsewhere are really scared to talk about Islamism as a distinct problem. People think that if you raise the problem of a politicized Islamic culture, you're going to be accused of Islamophobia, so people just shut up. And they do this on many, many issues. I think it is important, and this is where bravery comes into it, radicalism comes into it, to say what needs to be said and not to be worried about the fact that you're going to be unpopular or you're going to be accused of all kinds of different things.
Yes. Actually, before we go into that, you mentioned the think tank in Brussels. I call it obviously the MCC, which is the Matthias Corvinus Collegium, isn't it? This is originally a Hungarian school, isn't it? It's like it's a college which was set up a few years ago in Hungary. And this is the what? This is the Brussels branch of it, or what?
Well, in Hungary, it's a very big institution, and it's kind of it's kind of came into being about 4 or 5 years ago. It's really taken off. We are not its branch, although we're closely linked to it because we have a tremendous degree of autonomy to decide how to respond to developments in Brussels. But we're very closely linked to them. And our job is, on the one hand, to educate the students that they send out, but more importantly, from my point of view, is to project an alternative narrative to the one that is dominant in Brussels with the European Union. And my dream is to kind of encourage the creation of a conservative network of intellectuals to basically develop an intellectual alternative to what's really going on, so that we can challenge the hegemony of their point of view, which I think can be done. But we need to bring in all kinds of Europeans. We need to mobilize as many people who are smart and clever and open to new ideas to participate in this adventure. And in many respects, I think what we're doing is a kind of Gramsci in reverse.
Yes, yes. Well, I remember I've been to the MCC in Budapest, and we filmed there, in fact, and it seemed to be quite explicit that, in fact, you know, or should I say implicit, really, that in fact it was about trying to redress the balance, you know, in the elites, as it were, creating a new elite, which I think is an admirable thing. Do you find it easy to be interested in what you might call the party political element of what's going on in Europe now? I mean, when we talk about this sort of subject and how basic it is, I find that I simply can't take it seriously. You know, that no one is looking at these real questions when it comes to, in the case of Britain, parliamentary, you know, politics. In Europe, it seems to be that there is more movement. I mean, do you ever want to be involved politically in that way yourself?
Sometimes I'm drawn in that direction.
Because you did start a party, didn't you, way back in the 70s?
I did, and several people suggested that I get involved and play an active role. But I think that my job, what I'm really good at, I think, is speaking and writing and educating. And I think the challenge of contributing to the building of a alternative intellectual elite is very exciting.
Yeah.
And I think that's a doable project.
Yeah.
I think it's something that I can make a good contribution to. And what I'm really interested in doing is finding partners, other individuals who are committed to this kind of objective. And I think that's important, and it will really, really help those political parties that are moving in the same direction. Because the one thing that they all have in common, whether it's in France or in Holland or in Sweden or Spain, is that they lack the necessary intellectual resources, the backup from academics and thinkers and philosophers that would help them to have that kind of confidence, intellectual confidence to make a bigger impact than is the case at the moment. And I think that if we can do what we're doing at the moment, we could really help political parties gain a bit more confidence and greater intellectual momentum than is the case at the moment.
Yes, I think that the point's been made that here, at least, that link, or any link that there was between political parties and an intellectual foundation, has really been broken. You know, it's very healthy in terms of, you know, channels like this, or, you know, organisations, think tanks. That's sort of going on very healthy, but it has no kind of connection whatsoever to the Tory party, for example, because it's not wanted on Journey, as it were. It's just not wanted.
I think that's true. I think that's a problem, obviously. But the other problem is, even in Britain, which is in a better place in this respect than some other countries, is that we still haven't got enough people on our side in academia or in that kind of broader cultural world than we need. And sometimes when I go to a meeting or a conference, I literally know everybody, which is a bad sign, because I want to meet people that I don't know. I want to find academics or philosophers who I've never heard of, or because that would mean that there's more of us, you know, than is the case at the moment. But having said that, we are in a better position. I think France and Britain have probably got more people in the cultural and the academic world on our side than most other places in Western Europe.
Yes, well, actually, Meloni in Italy was going to make an absolute point of appointing more conservative-minded people to art, for example, arts positions. You know, you've outlined what you do and what is most important about what you do. But when it comes to, for want of an expression, people who are not in, positions where they have a platform, ordinary people in the street, the kind of people who are so bewildered by what is going on, historically I mean, how can they fight back, do you think?
I think there's a number of ways they can fight back. I think the first thing is we need to have a bit of courage, because unfortunately at the moment, many people, there are millions of people that share many of our values, but they feel that they are under, they are under attack all the time, and therefore they very often self-censor. Very often they don't have those conversations because it's going to be a bit of a hassle. They're going to maybe even lose some friends as a result of that. So I think the first thing is, I think people need to have a bit more confidence and understand that there are more of us than they suspect, and open your, open your mouth and speak up, even as an individual, because every individual that takes a stand catches other people unaware and can influence other people. So I think that's the first thing. I think second thing is that there's always networks and communities in most parts of the country where you're likely to meet like-minded people, and therefore searching for like-minded people is really important, both because it keeps you sane in a difficult environment, it keeps you sane, but also by working together and learning from each other, you can create a bit of a momentum. And sometimes you meet these things in the most unlikely places. So for example, I was asked to go to Eton College, this was a year or two ago, on the grounds that they wanted somebody to take up what they saw as a very strong, powerful, woke culture that was developed there. And I was told, look, Frank, you're not going to get very many friends, in the college, from the teachers and the headmaster and all the rest of that. But it's worth you coming. So I come along. I arrive at the Porter's Lodge, and I'm waiting for the teacher to pick me up. And I look around, and the porter looks at me, says, "You're Frank Furedi." I said, "Yeah." "I've seen you on GB News." I said, "Oh yeah, good on you. You guys, And then all the other porters came in.
Yes.
And they all basically said, how much they like GB News, how much they like what I said, how they too are for Brexit, et cetera, et cetera. And you knew that even in Eton College, there would be at least some people, sort of on the right side of history, dare I say. Yeah. And then what was really lovely is that the voice that I spoke to, it was almost like as if I gave them permission to say what they really believed in. Yes. And after I spoke, they just stayed around, and it was like a really nice vibe, really nice buzz, because they finally heard somebody give voice to their concerns. So I always think that even in the most unlikely places, you can meet people who are angry and who want to, in a sense, gain clarity about how to deal with the very kind of complex circumstances that confront us.
I absolutely agree, and this is where the internet or YouTube and these sort of things also come into their own. Can you imagine if we were still labouring under like just 4 channels and this was happening? It would be impossible. Well, Frank, you so much for coming in and talking. We actually have members who we give a few extra questions to, if you don't mind sort of hanging on for a bit. But in the meantime, it is The War Against the Past, Frank Furedi's new book, which is out, I believe, on September 6th.
That's right, yeah.
That's right. So, and on Amazon, of course, and in various bookshops. So thank you very, very much indeed.
Pleasure. Nice talking to you.
And that's it for this week. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.